Reese's holding Hershey's constant, but the additional happiness you get from consuming one more unit holding everything else constant does go down. Can it in reality ever go negative? Can you have too much beer and there's a situation in your life where you're somewhere and you're thinking, well, man, that last one, that was bad, right? It happens. It shouldn't. You're better off drinking water. But occasionally, yes, there can be in the real world scenarios where the marginal utility goes negative. I'm going to argue that a rational individual would never consume where the marginal utility of that additional unit is actually negative, right? It sort of goes against this notion of non-satiation. Does it happen in the real world? Yes. Do you learn from it? Yes. You swear you're never going to do it again, right? Yeah. Okay. So that's the whole thing graphically. But I've spelled it out, I think, pretty nicely here. Again, it's something we call the law of diminishing marginal utility. It sounds really, really fancy, but it's just fancy speak. The first hand of popcorn at the movies tastes amazing. I'm going to eat the second one. It's still so good. The third one, going to eat it. I'm happier, but it just wasn't quite as good as that first hand, right? So the point here is, overall, you get more happiness the more you consume, but the additional amount of happiness you get, the incremental amount of happiness you get from each unit of additional consumption goes down, okay? I have eaten 10 chocolate bars in a dare. Do not do it, all right? It's really bad. There's something called the chocolate fair at Ford Mason. I had 140 pieces of chocolate with Jeff Perloff, who wrote your textbook. We were lunatics right after. Okay, so here we go. Why is Max bothering me with this concept of marginal utility? So if I have one criticism of most economics classes, and maybe my own too, is that we often teach you these concepts that don't seem that relevant, right? Am I learning economics just for economics' sake, or is there some sort of behavioral underpinning that helps me to better understand the world, or in our case, we're social science, how to better understand how individuals behave in the world of scarcity? And I'm going to argue, and I slowly introduced this already to you last time, that your willingness to substitute between two goods, between Reese's and Hershey's, is directly related to the marginal utility you get out of consuming one more Reese's holding Hershey's constant, or consuming one more Hershey's holding Reese's constant. So this willingness to substitute between Reese's and Hershey's, which is the slope of your indifference curve, simply tells me how many Reese's am I willing to give up in order to gain one more Hershey's, right? Or in other words, what's the exchange rate at which you're willing to trade in Reese's for one more Hershey's? So this is, I think, our first formula. It looks, not the second one, I already sprung one on you, but this one looks more terrifying than the last one, I think. So what does this here say? The marginal rate of substitution, your willingness to substitute one good for another, is the ratio, meaning the change in Reese's over the change in Hershey's. So if I get to scribble on the side of my notes, no, I'm prepared. It's my motto this year. I'm going to walk into the classroom really prepared. So where does this come from? Marginal rate of substitution is the change in Reese's over the change in Hershey's. Well, if this here is Hershey's, and this here is Reese's, right? I could draw an indifference curve. I'm worried that if I touch the screen of this thing, it'll do crazy things. So let me draw you a nice indifference. Oh, see, I told you it's going to do crazy things. Draw, you think? Oh, I got to practice more. But that looks like an indifference curve. Envision this thing smooth. Let's try one more time. There's a little blip up there. Come on. Okay, let's try one more time. There's also a button on this pen. I have no idea what it does. That's not better at all. Okay, but the point, well, I'll get better at this as I practice. But the point here is if I take two bundles, right? Let's call this here bundle A, and let's call this here bundle B. Because they're on the same indifference curve, I'm indifferent between the two bundles, right? I'm indifferent between having 5 Hershey's and 3 Reese's and having 6 Reese's and 2 Hershey's. Totally the same thing to me, even though they're different combinations of good. What we argued is the marginal rate of substitution is how many Reese's you're willing to give up in order to gain more Hershey's, right? While holding the level of happiness or satisfaction constant. So if I move from A to B, right, for a move from A to B, how many Reese's am I giving up? Well, I'm going from 6 Reese's to 3 Reese's, so the change in Reese's is simply going down here to this imaginary point, right? Now at B, I have 3 Reese's, so I'm giving up 3 Reese's. So this is my change in R. If I were to consume this bundle of 3, 2, would I still be as happy as before? Who said yes? Don't say yes, right? So if I have 6, 2, and I all of a sudden took 3 Reese's away from you and didn't give you anything else, would you be less happy? Let me do this differently. You have a car. I take your car away from you. Are you less happy? Yes, right? So same argument here. So here now, if I actually move to this point here, I would be less happy. I would be on an indifference curve that goes through that imaginary point right here. So the thought experiment for the marginal rate of substitution, that's not that experiment. The thought experiment for the marginal rate of substitution is one where I remain on the same indifference curve, and I want to know the rate at which I'm willing to trade Reese's in for more Hershey's. So what I've got to do in order to complete that thought experiment, I've got to finish my path by migrating over here to B. So I'm giving up Reese's, but I'm getting more Hershey's. How many more Hershey's am I getting? Well, I'm going from 2 to 5, so 3, right? So it's the change in Hershey's. So I'm indifferent between A and B. I'm willing to trade in 1, 2, 3 Reese's for 1, 2, 3 more Hershey's. So my marginal rate of substitution here is -1. This is a big change, right? Not an incremental change, so we can talk about this later. But what does this mean? I'm willing to give up 3 Reese's for 3 more Hershey's. So my marginal rate of substitution is -3 Reese's divided by the number of Hershey's I get in addition divided by 3. So my marginal rate of substitution here is -1. Okay? So this is where this formula comes from in my previous graph here, right? We know this. We've done this already in a picture last time. So the marginal rate of substitution, this is the move down, and this here is the move across. How many Reese's are you willing to trade in? Meaning delta R Reese's is the number of Reese's you're willing to trade in for delta H more Hershey's. For those of you who've taken calculus, of course, this delta H really is going to be an infinitesimal change right here. But usually throughout this class, I'm just going to assume it's a 1-unit change, or if I want it to be a bigger change, I'll spell out how many unit change it will be. So that's pretty nice, right? The marginal rate of substitution is simply the rise over the run, the change in Reese's over the change in Hershey's. So now, you haven't said anything whatsoever, Max, about marginal utility. I am terrified. I see some of you sweating. I can see it in the last row happening right now, and I know why. You're seeing this word here, P-R-O-O-F, proof. And he's got a pen in his hand, and he does a lot of math. This is going to be terrifying. Well, what I'm going to show you first using intuition and then show you algebraically, is that we can relate this marginal rate of substitution, this willingness to substitute how many Reese's you're willing to give up for more Hershey's, directly to how much additional utility you get from those additional Hershey's relative to the amount of utility you lose from those fewer Reese's, right? So let's try and do that, right? First intuition, then math, then relaxation, okay? So let's go back to this terrible looking picture right here. So as I go from A to this imaginary intermediate point right here, let's call this one, I don't know, what's a good stopover? MacArthur? Call it C, okay? This point C here. As I go from A to C, am I more happy, less happy, or equally as happy as at A? Oh, you guys are great. So yeah, you're less happy, right? You're giving up Reese's, holding Hershey's constant. What concept told me something about the change in happiness holding Hershey's constant? I'm so excited. Marginal utility. That was the definition of marginal utility, right? How does my level of utility change as I get more, or in this case, fewer of one good, holding the other good constant, right? So the utility loss of moving from A to C is the marginal utility change of getting 3 fewer Reese's, right? So I am losing a certain number of utils by moving from A to C, and that's the marginal utility of giving up 3 Reese's. This is so exciting. So in order to make you as well off as before, now that I've taken away 3 Reese's from you, and you've lost that amount of marginal utility, to get you back to your prior level of marginal overall happiness, how many utils do I have to give you? The same amount. Do I get to just give you back your Reese's? No, I'm not doing it by just moving you back up here. So what am I giving you to get you back to the same amount? Hershey's, right? So what I'm doing is I am taking away happiness from you. I'm taking away the marginal utility of 3 units of Reese's away from you. And then I'm giving you, as an exchange, enough additional Hershey's that your overall level of utility is preserved. And the number of Hershey's I have to give you depends on how much marginal utility you get out of 1 additional Hershey's relative to how much marginal utility you lose from 1 less Reese's, right? It's not a 1-for-1 trade. It depends on the marginal utility of these 2 goods, right? This Reese's and Hershey's, they're sort of the same thing. But if you're thinking about rides in Lamborghinis and, 2-ounce cups of water, if you want me to give up 1 ride in a Lamborghini for 20 laps around Infineon racetrack, you're going to have to compensate me with a lot of cups of water, right? Basically a lifetime supply plus, irrigation water for my entire neighborhood, essentially. But the point here is the exchange rate here, the rate at which you're willing to exchange these two, is directly related to the overall utility loss from getting fewer Reese's to the overall utility gain from getting more Hershey's. So pretty cool. That's the intuitive proof. The math proof is so much easier. A blank page, the mathematician's best friend. Okay. Are you ready for this? I'm going to sit down for a second. I'm exhausted. That was an emotional moment here in this class. All right. So what are we after? What I want to show is a relationship between the marginal rate of substitution, meaning the change in R over the change in Hershey's, and how that relates to marginal utility. So I'm going to, you can't dream this up, right? Somebody very famous figured this out, so I'm going to recreate this for you. So if you're panicked and saying on an exam I could never think this up, that's totally all right. It took mankind 25 million years to get to this proof. I'm not going to expect you to come up with material of this depth within 80 minutes, okay? But I want you to understand where this comes from. So what's the marginal utility of Hershey's? Come on. I'm starting to not like you. Not you guys, this thing. What is wrong with you? Right. There we go. Yeah, all right. Marginal utility of Hershey's. Oh, this is not so great. Change in U over the change in H, right? We agree that the marginal utility of Hershey's is the change in utility over the change in the number of Hershey's you get holding Reese's constant. So what I could do is I could solve this thing for the change in U, right? Just bring delta H to the other side. So the change in U is simply equal to the marginal utility of H times the change in H, right? I'm just taking my equation, my definition of marginal utility, and just rearranging it by solving for the change in utility. I'm going to do the same amazing thing for the marginal utility of Reese's, where I'm going to solve for the change in U equal to the marginal utility of Reese's times the change in Reese's. That's just taking the definition of the 2 marginal utilities and solving for the change in U. What do I know? You don't have to film this stuff. It's all online. It's on iTunes U in high def. Download it. You don't have to tape stuff. All right, so what do I know about an indifference curve and the level of utility along a given indifference curve? Does it change? No, you're indifferent, right? So your level of utility is the same. So what's the change in U on a given indifference curve? 0. Do I see change in U somewhere scribbled on this terrible slide right here? I see it here, and I see it up there. So on a given indifference curve, the change in U is equal to 0. This is 0. This is 0. So I've got 2 equations here that both are equal to 0, so they have to be equal to each other on a given indifference curve. So what I get is MUH times change in H is equal to MUR times change in R. Max, I'm excited. I love this expression. It says nothing to me, all right? Give me some intuition. Well, actually, this doesn't tell me anything either. But what I can do is I can bring all the utility things on the left-hand side and all the actual physical units things on the right-hand side and see if we get something cool out of it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by delta H. So on the right-hand side, I get delta R over delta H. And I'm going to bring MUR to the right-hand side, to the left-hand side by dividing both this whole equation by MUR, the marginal utility of Reese's. So I have MUH over MUR. Okay, I'm about to start jumping around from excitement. Do you see something so exciting? Okay, I'm offering the last cash I have. Sometimes that's a 20. Once I had to give away 100. That was really bad. Fortunately, I only have $1 today. What's so exciting about that? Do we see something in this box that we know? Yes, in the back. Oh, you right now are my favorite student and just gained $1. All right, let me bring it to you. So delta R over delta H, I'm going to try and not trip. One year I fell, and that was much excitement for the student body. Here you go. I know it doesn't even buy a coffee anymore, but $1 is better than no dollar. So the point here is the change in Reese's over the change in Hershey's, that's just the marginal rate of substitution. That's my willingness to substitute away from Reese's for more Hershey's. All right, that's pretty exciting. So this here is exactly equal to the marginal rate of substitution. Well, Max, come on, man. I knew that. Well, I knew that too, but what didn't you know? that that's also equal to the ratio of the marginal utility of Hershey's over the marginal utility of Reese's, all right? So your willingness to give up Reese's for more Hershey's depends on the relative valuation of, or the relative additional happiness you get out of one more unit of Hershey's versus one more unit of Reese's, right? If you value Hershey's relatively highly, you're willing to give up a lot of Reese's for one more Hershey's. If you value Reese's relatively highly, you're willing to give up very few Reese's relative to Hershey's. Pretty logical, right? So think of a combination, right? You get your, I don't know what you get candy for holidays. In our house, my wife's Jewish, I'm Protestant, so we have so many holidays, it's not even funny. So let's pick a random one. Easter, there's always candy involved, and I was always disappointed by the mix of tangerines versus chocolate eggs, right? Who cares about tangerines? Come on, it's chocolate eggs is what it's all about. So I valued tangerines relatively little and chocolate eggs a lot, so I was willing to trade in a lot of tangerines for just one more chocolate egg, right? So my marginal utility from one chocolate egg was much, much higher than the marginal utility from one tangerine. And again, this depends on your preferences for those goods. Question in the back. I have no more dollar bills, by the way. Yeah. I love that you asked this question. You totally earn another dollar. I'll bring you one next time. Max, I'm Berkeley, right? I can handle more than two goods. In fact, Walter, Fiona, what do you study in graduate school? An infinite number of goods. They're called K goods. You can make this number as large as you want. What changes in your understanding? Nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. So the point here is the same stuff I'm teaching you here holds for 3 goods, 4 goods, 20 goods, 1,000 goods. The intuition does not change. The underlying behavioral implications do not change. The only thing that changes is my ability to draw in 2D and the mathematics required to solve problems. But you're absolutely right. Am I shortchanging you by just looking at 2 goods? No. The other way to look at this particular world, Reese's and Hershey's, is to just say, well, I'm going to look at 2 goods. One is Hershey's, and the other one is all other goods, right? So you come up with a composite good that's everything else you consume, and then you just pick one out that is the good you're interested in, right? Deep-fried wasabi-covered peanuts, yum, versus all other goods consumed. Then you come up with, as we'll see in a second, a price index for these other goods, and you look at the relative price of wasabi versus composite other good, and you're looking at all goods in 2D. But that's a really great question. Okay, so the marginal rate of substitution is related to the relative marginal utility you get from consuming one more unit of the 2 goods you're looking at. All right. So this is really the end of the part where I talk about what you like. Right? Let's just revisit for a second and figure out where we are. Have I said anything about what you can afford? I haven't used the word income, prices, relative prices, anything like that at all. All we've talked about, and we all love talking about ourselves, whether we admit it or not, is we like to talk about what we like and what we don't like. So I like to listen in on student conversations across campus. Yesterday, or the day before, was all about the Grammys and what people liked and what they didn't like. So you can sort of trace out individuals' preferences over more Madonna performances versus Stevie Wonder with, what are the French guys called? You guys are, my pathetic attempt at trying to be hip has just failed. Daft Punk, there you go, thank you. So you could trace all of these things out, but we've just talked about preferences. We haven't talked about prices at all yet. So we're done with the part of the initial treatment of what you like and how you like things relative to each other and what this means for your willingness to trade between goods. So this allows you to study the things that make you happier, right? How do you make yourself happier? By consuming more of everything. Well, can you do that? Some people can, but there's not that many in the world. Most of us face scarcity. So where we're going to move to next is characterizing scarcity. And how we characterize scarcity in this particular class is through a budget constraint, right? We're going to limit the amount of income you have, and then you're going to have to choose between goods depending on what the relative prices of these goods are. If you don't like income, you can think of income being limited by the number of hours per day you can work and what wage you get per hour, and that determines your income. We will actually explicitly model that labor leisure choice in about 3 or 4 lectures. So we've characterized preferences. That's the part of the book that looks at preferences, and now we're going to look at scarcity. So scarcity here, and we call it the budget constraint. You could just call it I'm all out of money, or I've got 20 bucks, what can I get for it? So the point here is we're going to look at scarcity, and the scarcity thing in mathematical terms we're going to look at is called the budget constraint. So I'm going to assume, for now, that you're going to spend all of your money on 2 goods, Reese's and Hershey's. How exciting, Max? The first question that comes up immediately is, well, Max, I saved some money. Well, if given current tuition prices, the level of minimum wage, and availability of jobs, you're managing to save money right now, you're amazing. You really are. But the point here is if you're worried about saving, I certainly should be saving money for retirement and that ride in a Lamborghini around a racetrack at some point. Aren't you saving some money, so not spending all of your money? We'll talk about that model later. But essentially what that just says is there's 2 goods you're consuming, current consumption and future consumption. And savings are captured in the second good, which is future consumption. So you just think Reese's is today's consumption, Hershey's is future consumption. Bless you. But for now, I'm going to assume you spend all of your money that you've allocated to spending in this current period on 2 goods, Hershey's and Reese's. And what your budget constraint looks like is pretty simple. So Y in micro is always income. All right, I think in macro it's 2. Y, yeah, that's right. So Y is income. That's the total amount of money you have. It could be cash or how much disposable income you have right now. And you have to split up that income between the amount of money you're going to spend on Reese's and the amount of money you're going to spend on Hershey's. The amount of money you have to spend simply in econ slang is expenditure. How much money can you spend on one commodity versus on